Good morning. I'm Kimberly Craig, the President and CEO of the Monterey County Business Council. Thanks for joining us today. We're pleased to partner with the Small Business Development Center, also known as the SBDC, to offer these time-sensitive topics to you via webinar every Friday. The Monterey County Business Council is a membership-based organization that works together with private business, the public sector, and nonprofit organizations. We're always looking to expand our network, so if you think we're doing good work, we'd love to have you as a member. You can find a membership application on our website at mcbc.biz. Additionally, our partners at the SBDC provide no-cost one-on-one business consulting, workshops, and webinars to businesses in Monterey and San Benito counties who register for their services at calcoastalsbdc.com. We're in our 12th and final week of our webinars, which were designed to communicate with you about COVID-related issues in the business community. When you registered, you gave us your email address. Next week, we'll send out a link with all 12 webinar discussions on small business issues. Additionally, I do want to let you know that sporadically, other webinars will be available to members of Monterey County Business Council and participants in previous webinars through the Small Business Development Center, the Procurement Technical Assistance Center, and Monterey County Business Council. I do want to thank our partners, the SBDC, the City of Salinas, and the County of Monterey, as well as the U.S. Small Business Administration and the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Additionally, I want to give a shout out to Luis Alvarez of Alvarez Technology Group. The team over there is producing the webinar today. I do want to encourage you to ask as many questions as you want. There's a Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen where you can ask those questions. We are also recording this webinar and we'll send you a link with the recording so you can review today's class. We'll also send out the contact information for our speakers today. And with that, I'd like to go over the agenda. First, we'll have an update from the Economic Impact Disaster Loan and the Paycheck Protection Program with Cindy Merzon, the Director of Cal Coastal Small Business Development Center. And then we'll launch into our main topic today. What is an IIPP, the Injury and Illness Prevention Plan? And how do I write one for my company? Today, we have featured guests Andrew Venegas, a loss control consultant with State Compensation Insurance Fund, and Monica Meyer, an associate engineer with State Compensation Insurance Fund. Boy, that's a tongue twister. And then we'll wrap up with questions. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Cindy Merzon, who's going to cover the EIDL and the PPP update. Welcome, Cindy.
Good morning, everyone. Louis, if you can let me share my screen. Okay, here we go. So you get to have dessert first today. I'm going to give you an update on what's happening with disaster loans. The screen looks busy. It's only to make sure that you have all of the detailed information available once you get a copy of the webinar and slides after the event. But I want to highlight the yellow areas. So the Economic Injury Disaster Assistance Loan Program, that's the loan that you can apply directly for through the SBA Disaster Loan Portal online, is now open again for all businesses. So that's great news. The big information here is don't delay. We don't know how long the funds are going to be available. So if you have not already applied for the Economic Injury Disaster Assistance Loan, better known as EIDL, jump on that link and apply. It has the potential of up to $10,000 in advance doesn't have to be repaid. And you can see you can borrow up to $2 million at 3.75% interest for 30 years fixed. That's a pretty good deal. The other excellent news that has occurred this week is that the Paycheck Protection Program, which is a loan that you can apply for directly through lenders. If you need help on lenders, there's a link for where to do that, or you can call us and we're happy to help you. The big news about the Paycheck Protection Program is they've made it more flexible, and I'll go over some specifics about that. The deadline to apply for the PPP is June the 30th, so don't delay there if you think you'd like to do that. You'll see in the middle, the purpose line, it says that the loan will be forgiven. So that means you don't have to pay it back if the funds are used for payroll costs, interest on mortgage, rent, and utilities. And the big news is they changed, you used to have to apply at least 75% of your loan to payroll. They've dropped that down to at least 60% in order to be eligible for forgiveness. So there's obviously a lot more details and about forgiveness, but that's the big news. The other news is that initially the maturity of that loan was for 2 years. Now for anybody whose PPP loan is approved after June the 5th, which is the date that the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act was signed by the president, has a 5-year maturity date. If you don't get it all forgiven, you have that much time to pay it back. They also changed the deferred payment date. So now you do not have to make a payment on your PPP loan until if SBA remits forgiveness, the forgiveness amount, you don't have to make a payment until that point in time. If you don't apply for forgiveness, then you have 10 months of deferred payments if you don't request for forgiveness. And then lastly, the Monterey County revolving loan fund, specifically the emergency microloan, still has money available. It's a small loan. It's also for businesses in Monterey County that are affected by COVID-19, as most businesses are. Just want to let you know that there's information there on how to apply for that loan. And finally, I want to give you a little bit more details, and of course I didn't put this on presentation. On the PPP, there are new forgiveness applications. The first one they put out was extremely complicated and detailed that you almost needed an accountant to help you do it. They now have a new easy application, which applies for borrowers who are self-employed and have no employees, or they're a borrower that did not reduce their salary or wages of their employees by more than 25% and did not reduce the number or hours of their employees, or they experienced reductions in business activity as a result of health directives related to COVID-19 and did not reduce salaries or wages of their employees by more than 25%. Much reduced. It's a much smaller application, so that's great news. And then there's a new full forgiveness application that reflects the changes in the Act. And finally, there's a new resource for businesses from the Monterey County Workforce Development Board. It's a small business grant. They are accepting applications for up to $2,500 to assist businesses in purchasing PPP items, remote access equipment for their employees, and other creative approaches to reduce or eliminate the need for layoffs. So there's a link here for the application and more information. And then finally, the SBDC is still here to help you with no-fee one-on-one business counseling. Here's where you register, and here's where you can find more information about future webinars and workshops that are available to you. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing so that you all can see the presentations from Andrew and Monica from the State Compensation Insurance Fund. Take it away, Andrew and Monica.
Hi, my name is Monica Meyer. I'm a loss prevention engineer with State Fund, and I'm here with Andrew Venegas.
Hello, Andrew Venegas, loss prevention consultant with State Fund.
And we're here today to talk to you about the Injury and Illness Prevention Program, and we're also going to share some online resources on how to build your own IIPP. We have an IIPP builder, and we also have a program that will help you develop a COVID exposure prevention plan. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so what we're going to do, I told you what we're going to do, and this question came up. So who needs an IIPP? If you have one part-time employee, you're required to have an injury and illness prevention program, and that went into effect in 1991, so it's been around for quite a while. So these are the 8 elements of an IIPP, and we're going to cover each one of these one at a time. The first one is responsibility. So when you're writing up your IIPP, you want to make sure you list the name, the title, and the contact information for the person who has the overall responsibility. And that person should be a decision maker for the company, not a clerical person that doesn't have any authority to stop work. You want to list also the name of your company, and you want to indicate where you keep copies of your IIPP. And then, and what I recommend you do too is put the date that you developed your IIPP and update it on an annual basis.
Right. Just as Monica said, that's exactly what I was going to state, is just to make sure that your program is updated on an at least an annual basis. So essentially your IIPP is your written safety program that is required by Cal OSHA. And within that written safety program, there are 8 elements, which we'll be going over today. So the first element, obviously responsibility, just to reiterate, you want to make sure that that person has the overall responsibility of safety within your company. A lot of the times, I know Monica can attest to this, when we go out and do inspections, sometimes we'll see, sometimes the office manager is listed as the responsible party for a construction company for their IIPP. You just want to make sure that that person that does have who has responsibility, who you're going to be deeming responsible, does have the authority and is familiar with the kind of work that they're doing. So making sure that you can have a person responsible for the office section, and you can also have a person responsible for the construction part of your business as well.
Those are great points, Andrew. The second section is compliance. So you want to recognize employees that are following your safety rules. And in order for them to follow your safety rules, you have to develop safety rules. So I recommend that every company either have a code of safe practices. Construction companies are required to have a code of safe practices at every job site. And other companies, I recommend that you develop a code of safe practices or safety rules, something that your employees know that they need to do and they need to follow. And employees that are working in a safe manner, you need to recognize them. If you're noticing that employees aren't working safely, then maybe there's a training issue. So maybe you need to retrain them. And if employees are not following your safety rules, then you need to take disciplinary action. And typically that's goes in stages. So you would start by probably giving them an oral warning. And then if they don't comply, they might be written up and suspended and possibly terminated.
And it's also very important just to take note of the compliance section. Cal OSHA uses this if they were to review your safety program. They want to make sure that what your company is putting in place, they just want to make sure that your employees are following the rules, or they understand what is expected of them. So you can either do that, like Monica mentioned, a recognition program. We just want to make sure that if you are developing a recognition program, you want to steer clear of sometimes what Cal OSHA likes, or what they see basically is sometimes you'll see if you work in a factory or if you work in a warehouse, they'll have those big signs that say X amount of days without a safety accident. Sometimes employers will kind of use that to basically reward employees. If they go X amount of days, they'll receive maybe a week of vacation, or maybe they'll receive, I don't know, some kind of luncheon or something. So you just want to be careful with those, just because Cal OSHA does want to make sure that although you are recognizing employees for practicing work safety, you also want to make sure that you are allowing employees to report work accidents when it comes to safety. You want to make sure that you're not deterring them from reporting a workplace accident. So anytime you're conducting or you're making a recognition program, you just want to make sure that you are communicating with employees that they should be reporting workplace accidents.
Yes. Those are all great points, Andrew. So the third element is communication. So communication involves a lot of ways that you communicate safety to employees. The most common one is holding regular safety meetings. And how frequently do you hold those? If you're a construction company, you should hold them every 10 working days. And if you're working on weekends, I recommend that you hold them on a weekly basis. Employees also need a way to report any safety concerns they have without feeling like they're going to be reprimanded. So an anonymous method for them to do that would be ideal. And then whenever you get new employees, those employees need to be trained. So I recommend you have a new worker orientation. So review the IIPP with them and let them know what their responsibilities are. That should also include safety and health training. We talked about the weekly tailgate meetings for construction companies. And then also, what other methods do you use to communicate safety? Some companies have a newsletter where they'll communicate safety issues. Some companies will do posting, or they'll put a paycheck flyer in that relates to safety. And some companies will have a safety suggestion box.
Right, and State Fund does have a lot of material, which I'll show you later on in the presentation, of how to access some of the safety topics that you can use for tailgate meetings or safety meetings. But the biggest point that I think I want to drive home for the safety communication portion of this is just to make sure that all safety meetings are documented. That's one of the biggest things I think you'll kind of hear us talk through today. Cal OSHA they need to make sure that everything that you are doing as far as it comes to safety, you want to make sure that it's documented. So when you do have your regular safety meetings, you can have just kind of like a sign-in sheet with the date and the topic that was covered, and then just keep that filed with all of your employees' records for safety training.
Yes, that's a great point, Andrew. If you don't document what you've done, Cal OSHA will just basically feel that you didn't do anything. And if hopefully you won't be visited by Cal OSHA, but if you are, then they're going to end up issuing you a citation, even if you did the training. So the fourth element that we're going to talk about is hazard identification. So what that is basically is conducting regular or periodic inspections to identify any unsafe working conditions. And typically when you're writing up your IIPP, you want to make sure you indicate what does periodic mean. If you're a construction company, periodic might mean that you're doing daily inspections of the job site. If you're a warehouse, maybe it might be monthly. It really depends on the risk of your business, but I think it's a good idea. It's a good practice to do a monthly safety inspection. You need to update your fire extinguishers on a monthly basis anyway. And so I think it's just a good procedure to do. And in addition to your physical areas, you also want to do monthly inspections on things like your ladders, if you have ladders at your job site or your workplace, and extension cords, any other or equipment or tools that you're using as well, because those are also hazards. So in addition to these regular periodic inspections, you also want to do a hazard identification when you first establish your IIPP. So some of you don't have an IIPP right now. What you'll do is you'll go back to your office and develop your IIPP. Once that's done, I recommend you have an orientation with all of your employees, and then also do hazard identification and do a thorough walkthrough of your facilities and see if there's any hazardous things that need to be addressed. Another time you want to do hazard identification is when you introduce new substances or new procedures or new equipment. So let's say you didn't have a forklift and you thought it makes sense for us to have a forklift at this point. You need to make sure you do a thorough inspection of that forklift to make sure it's safe. And then also in addition to that, we'll get to that later, but you'd also need to make sure your employees are certified on that equipment. And then finally, if you recognize a new hazard or something that was previously unidentified. When I worked at Cal OSHA, I did an inspection on a baler where an employee got his hand stuck in a baler that was not guarded, and the employer purchased the facility with the baler inside and there was no guard available, and they didn't realize that that was a hazard. So sometimes you don't know what's a hazard, but it's really important that you do that thorough hazard identification and safety inspection to make sure you can see what might be a risk for your employees.
Right, and it's also very important to make sure when you are conducting these periodic inspections that, again, they are documented. State Fund does have checklists for different types of hazards, different types of industries, but I know sometimes, let's say in the warehouse or manufacturing facilities, you might be on the ground floor with employees and you might be walking through daily and doing visual inspections, but as it pertains to the periodic schedule that you're going to have written down and identified in your IIPP, you want to make sure that's when you're kind of conducting a more thorough inspection of your facility. You're kind of putting on your inspector hat and kind of walking through in the eyes of, let's say, like a Cal OSHA inspector or somebody, and you're just kind of identifying any safety hazards that might be present that your employees could get injured or hurt from. So when you're conducting those inspections, it's a little bit more with like a white glove per se, and you just kind of want to go through and kind of take your time and utilize a checklist. And like Monica mentioned, you might be checking out the fire extinguishers. You might be looking at different pieces of equipment, and it's a little bit more thorough than just kind of your daily operations of visual inspections.
Yes, exactly. So the fifth element of your IIPP is accident investigations. When you're developing your IIPP, you want to list who is going to be conducting these investigations. And again, it should not be the office manager. It should be somebody who has authority. And typically what I'll see is, in addition to whoever's responsible for the safety program, it might also be a supervisor that will assist in conducting the accident investigation. Then it's important to get all your facts. What time did the accident occur? What date? Where did it happen? What happened? Who was involved? Were there any witnesses? All that information is really valuable. And actually, one other thing, I don't know if you have surveillance cameras in your location, but that can also be very valuable, because if you've got a video camera that's recording what occurred, that's going to be better than any eyewitness. And then also, when you're asking questions, use the who, what, where, why, how, and when. Those questions will really get to the detail of what occurred, and especially whys. That's a really great way to identify what actually happened. And as soon as you can, I recommend going out to visit the site where the accident occurred. If you don't do so, the site might change, especially if it's a construction site. They change within hours. And so if you take 1 or 2 weeks to get out to do your accident investigation, you might not be able to find any of the information that's going to help you prevent those accidents in the future. And then finally, if there are imminent hazards, you might need to stop work. If, let's say you're at a construction site and there's not a guardrail on the scaffolding and somebody fell off, get everybody off that scaffold and repair it. Get the guardrail back up before you allow anyone to work on that scaffold again.
Right. And it's also just always going back to finding out the root cause, like Monica mentioned. So you want to go through, and I know she can attest to this again, is when we're out conducting accident investigations, some of the things that we'll ask employers, basically the first question is, well, why did this accident occur? And a lot of the times, some of the responses we'll get is just kind of like, well, the employee wasn't paying attention. So you want to figure out why weren't they paying attention. For instance, I had a grease spill accident where an employee slipped and fell on some grease on the floor. And when I asked the employer, well, why did this happen? The employee was basically not paying attention, is what the employer stated. But come to find out, you're asking those questions. Well, where was the grease coming from? Was it a piece of faulty equipment? Was there not any kind of PPE that should have been worn, such as safety boots? Was there any kind of training that could have been conducted, to make sure that that grease spill should have been cleaned up as soon as, that it was identified? So just kind of going through and finding out exactly why an incident occurred and to prevent it from occurring again in the future. I know right now it's kind of different with the main exposure right now that everybody's kind of thinking of is COVID-19. So obviously whatever you can kind of do, going back again to identifying COVID as a hazard, you want to make sure that you're implementing what you can in the workplace to just make sure that that exposure is limited to your employees. So anything that you can put in place to make sure that you are not putting your employees in danger of being exposed to anybody with COVID-19, or maybe getting them to contract it, is what you want to eventually do to basically ensure that your employees are safe.
That was a great example, Andrew. And also one other thing I want to mention, when you're doing your accident investigation, I recommend taking photos of the scene, because in addition to getting the witness statements, if you have photos, that's going to show exactly what happened. And in 6 months or 8 months, people won't remember exactly what occurred, but you'll have the photos from the date, and you can see if there's a slip mark where somebody slipped in the grease, for example, or if you can see the scaffolding that didn't have a guardrail. Those kind of things you'll be able to see in 6 months from now. All right, so our sixth element is hazard correction. So when you're doing your hazard identification or accident investigations, you'll discover hazards, and those need to be corrected as soon as possible. Usually they need to be corrected as soon as you observe them or discover them. And then with an imminent hazard, like I mentioned, the scaffolding that doesn't have a guardrail, or if there's a gas leak, what you need to do is remove your employees from that work area, get a professional in, somebody who's qualified to repair that area before you allow your employees to go back to work.
Right. And again, you want to make sure that the person that is correcting the hazard does have the utmost authority to do so. That's why it's very important when you are creating your written program that you are identifying the employees in your workplace that can identify the different hazards in the workplace, and they do have the authority to remove employees when they do see that an imminent hazard is present.
Yeah, and actually, as Andrew also mentioned, make sure you're documenting everything, because whatever you don't document, if you have a hazard and you corrected it, but you don't document it, and somebody else gets injured on that same piece of equipment, very similarly to another employee, your company could be in a lot of trouble. So it's very important whenever you can that you document those kind of things, especially hazard corrections. That's pretty critical. So the next element is training. So we talked a little bit about communication. Training is actually training employees on the hazard of your company. So depending on what industry you're in, you might have different hazards. In construction, we have falling off of heights as a hazard, using ladders, using power tools. If you're in agriculture, it might be working with pesticides. It might be working with tractors. If you're in manufacturing, you could be working with forklifts, or maybe material handling might be an issue. So those are all things that employees need to be trained on before you allow them to go to work. And in addition, you do that initially. So you're developing your injury and illness prevention program. You want to do the training before you let your employees work. Whenever you hire new employees, you want to train them on the hazards of their job site before you allow them to work. And sometimes what I see is I'll see employers that allow employees to work and they're doing on-the-job training. But let's say you're a tree trimming company and you allow an employee to use a chainsaw before they've been properly trained on how to operate that chainsaw. If that employee gets injured, your company, you could not only face Cal OSHA penalties, but you could also face criminal penalties. And that's why it's so important to properly train your employees before you allow them to use any of your equipment. We mentioned this too, if an employee gets a new job assignment, like let's say an employee used to work in the office and now they're going to be doing field work, you'd want to train them on whatever hazards they would discover in the field. Also, when you introduce new substances, processes, procedures, or equipment, for example, if you didn't have a forklift and now you have a forklift at your operations, you need to do training and certification actually for your employees that are authorized to use that equipment. If you notice a hazard or you're made aware of a hazard that you didn't recognize before, then you need to do training at that point. And then also, this is really critical. You need to train your supervisors on what are their responsibilities in keeping a safe and healthful workplace for all of your employees, because they should have the authority and responsibility to make sure that all employees are working safely and that they have a safe workplace.
Right. And then also right now we are in the COVID-19 pandemic era. So training is a little bit different for all work sites right now. Obviously, yes, the points that Monica mentioned, those are critical to the IIPP in general. But right now we're also tailoring because COVID-19 right now could be considered, it is considered a hazard. So in the workplace, you have to make sure that you are identifying that if you are working with the public and if as everybody's returning to work right now, what methods and what procedures is your company taking to make sure that the exposure to COVID-19 is kept to a minimum? And then also training employees on new procedures. So that includes social distancing. You want to make sure that you're training them on how to properly wash their hands and sanitize equipment, maybe. Different methods in place to make sure that if they are communicating with maybe plexiglass, or if they're are used to maybe, working very close to the public, maybe rearranging your procedures to make sure that you are now allowing for social distancing to take place. So training, it just goes hand in hand with everything right now, especially with COVID. You just want to make sure that you're training employees on the current hazards that are present. Right now, the main prevalent one, like I said, is COVID-19. So you want to make sure that that training is documented. And when we talk a little bit later, I can show some of the resources that we have on our Safe at Work CA website, how you can train employees on some of the COVID-19 assessments that you can take to ensure that you are keeping exposure down to a minimum when working with the public.
Yes, and that's really good that you brought that up, because right now COVID-19 really is one of the biggest hazards that we have out on the job site. It's on everybody's mind, and it's important that you develop a plan to help reduce the risk of your employees contracting COVID. So all of your employees need to have access to your injury and illness prevention program. If you're a small employer, you'll have a relatively small IIPP, and I recommend you give a copy to all of your employees so they know exactly what their responsibilities are. They need to know if they have an accident, that they need to report it to their supervisor as soon as possible. And I didn't mention this earlier, but this is a point that I do want to make. When you're doing accident investigations, I recommend you also do near-miss accident investigations, because that can help prevent you from having a serious accident. If you can catch something when it's a near miss, you can make corrections, and then that serious accident won't happen. That's just a point I thought about right now. But give access to the employees to your IIPP, and if you can't give them a copy, then have it available somewhere where they can take a look at it. All right, and then the last section that I'm going to cover with you today is record keeping. So we mentioned this already a number of times, but make sure you're keeping all of your records and hazard corrections at least 1 year. Like I mentioned earlier, let's say you had a problem with the baler and you put a guard on it, and then a year later somebody's hand gets stuck in the baler, and Cal OSHA gets your records. Maybe they get the inspection record that there was a problem with the guard, but they didn't get the correction record that you actually put the guard back on, and maybe an employee removed the guard without you knowing. And if you don't have those inspection records, it might look like you altered something. So keep track of all of those things. Keep your safety and health training records for a year, and then document who is responsible for implementing and has the authority and responsibility. And I know Andrew has pointed that out numerous times, that you really need to make sure it's somebody who has authority and responsibility that is implementing your program. Keep your records of scheduled and periodic inspections. That's in addition to the hazard identification. You know, hazard identification could be anytime. Periodic scheduled inspections are regular inspections done on a regular basis. And then also keep records of all your training and instruction. And depending on what kind of training and instruction you're doing, you might need to keep those documents for a longer period of time. For example, if you're doing forklift certification, that certification lasts for a 3-year period, so you'd want to keep those records for 3 years. Okay. Right. And so now at this point, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Andrew, and he's going to review our IIPP builder and our state fund COVID-19 exposure protection plan, as well as some other resources that are available to you.
Yes, hello. My name is Andrew Venegas, and I'm going to just show you a little bit here some of the resources that State Fund does offer. I know we kind of went through the IIPP builder, or I'm sorry, the IIPP and the elements this morning. I do want to share with you the resource that State Fund does offer, just to kind of help you create a written program. So if any of you are familiar with maybe TurboTax, the online system that helps you, complete your taxes at the end of each year, we kind of built this system with the same kind of frame of mind of a person using TurboTax. We wanted to make it very user-friendly and very intuitive. So I can take you there and show you just how to access it really quick. Let's see. So if you can see my screen, Monica, let me know.
Yes.
Perfect. So this is our Safe at Work CA website. And as you can see on the top ribbon here, we have different safety by industry, different topics that you can access. I spoke a little bit earlier about having different topics to cover in your workplace. So if you're not in construction industry, if you're a small business in, let's say, an office environment or manufacturing or warehouse or anything of that nature, you can choose safety by topic here. Obviously, coronavirus is the big topic right now. So we have our own portal that will take you to our own resources on COVID-19. We do have different information here for heat illness. We have a whole section on IIPP. We also have our seminars as well. We do have regular seminars that we will be hosting virtually coming up soon as well. And also, in case any of you are state fund policyholders, we do have a grant available right now as well to help out with some of the COVID-19 related safety expenses. So if you're a policyholder and you have not heard about it, I encourage you to apply. But I'm going to take you right now to our IIPP builder. And if you click there, it's going to take you down. So whether or not you're a policyholder, it's open to the public. So if you're a policyholder, the only benefit that you would have is that it keeps your IIPP within your policy file for the lifetime of your policy with State Fund. If you want to access it as a guest user, you still have the option to save and print your program via PDF, and you just have to save it to your computer. It doesn't get saved into our portal. So I'm just going to walk you through here, and it's going to take you to our landing page for our IIPP builder. And it opens up, a lot of the sections here are going to have their own individual videos speaking on the different elements, just like Monica and I did earlier today. So they're going to give you an introductory video, and then as you go along through the builder, each element is going to have its respective video that will speak into more detail on the information that is required for that section. So this is the landing page. It gives you some information, how to use the builder. If you need any assistance at all, we do have our safety support unit mailbox. And then we also have a phone number there as well that you can contact. So I'm just going to go ahead and take you through here as if I were to create a program today with you. And then so you type in your name, your email address, the business name, and then the type of business that you are under, just choosing one of the industries. So you can go ahead and go with services. You can also choose to check mark that box, and it will take your information, and basically it will send you updates to the latest safety information, because our Safe at Work CA website is being updated on a very regular basis, especially right now in the COVID-19 era. Information is always being published on our website. And then if you would like to, you can have the option to upload your business logo to the plan. It just makes it a lot more streamlined if you choose to do so once you complete it. And then as you can see now, it takes us directly into the builder. And all the elements that Monica listed, we talked about earlier, are listed right here on the left-hand side. So it's going to take you step by step, and it's going to ask you, the first question is, who is in charge of your safety program, right? And then if you go over the hover notes are going to give you a little bit more in-depth information of what information they're requesting you to fill in there. So you're going to put your name of the person that has ultimate responsibility for your program, the title of that person, and then their contact information. And then it also gives you the ability to put different locations here as well. So if you have multiple locations, different office sites, or anything else that you would have where you're gonna have your IIPP located, you can input that information there as well. And then if you also get stuck again during any part of the program, you can go ahead and click the Get Help button, and it walks you through. It has you the phone number to contact as well. And so once you complete all the different elements, when you walk through it, it's gonna have some yes or no check boxes that it's gonna ask you some questions. And then once you complete that program based on the elements that we spoke about earlier, it's gonna create a written program, and I can go ahead and I can show you what that looks like once that is completed. So once you're done with this, it's gonna take you to a program that's gonna look just like an injury and illness prevention program. This is the PDF file here. So it's gonna have your company name, the logo, and it's gonna say it's an injury and illness prevention plan. And as you can see, it's all streamlined with the different elements being highlighted in bold. And it's gonna have the different content information that you inputted there. So that way, whoever is looking at your program can identify the 8 different elements and can go through and they can look exactly what they're looking for when they pick up your program. And to go back to our website, once you complete the program, it does take you to our next steps, because the first step is just creating a written program. But now in order for it to be an effective program, you want to make sure that you're implementing it. And State Fund offers a lot of different tools and resources to make sure that you are implementing an effective program. So if you go through here, it's gonna tell you exactly step by step how to implement your IIPP. It's going to tell you how to distribute it, how to review it with your managers and your supervisors, communicating it with all of your employees. And then it's also going to give you a lot of downloadable links here. So you can choose to download our safety training sign-in sheet, which I spoke about a little bit earlier. You want to make sure that all of your training is documented. So it's going to have the safety sign-in sheet, the accident investigation checklist, which we spoke about earlier on finding the root cause. So if you use our accident investigation checklist, it's going to walk you through some of the questions to find out the root cause and why the incident occurred. And then we also have different hazard identification checklists as well. So when you are doing your periodic inspections and your walkthroughs, you are going to be able to have the ability to tailor this to your specific operations. And then you can also use this when you're doing your inspections, whether it be monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, whatever you're going to choose to put it in your IIPP. So I know we went through some of the information today, and it's a lot of information on IIPP to be condensed in about 30 to 40 minutes. But I did want to give everybody the information here that we do have some safety seminars coming up. Our first one is going to be the COVID-19 Returning California to Work Safely. That's going to be a lot more focused on COVID-19 information. Today was kind of just a brief overview on IIPP in general. But this is going to be covering exactly on the methods and workplaces, how to return workplaces to work safely in the COVID-19 era. And then also we have one on implementing your injury and illness prevention program. That's also going to be held on June 30th. And you can register online, whether you're a policyholder or not, it's open to the public. And that's going to give you some more information. So keep in mind, these are about 4 hours of information, and we're trying to condense 4 hours into about 30 minutes here today. But they have a lot of information. They go over each element very thoroughly. And then they also have a Q&A section just as presented today where you can ask questions, and you can also reach out to them with any information or any questions you might have after you've created your IIPP using our builder. So with that, I will take this over to Monica.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for providing that information, Andrew. And I also wanted to say, I know a lot of the things that we spoke about today we gave construction examples, but if you're a small business and you're working in an office environment, you also have hazards. You might be doing a lot of keyboarding, and you might have ergonomic issues. Is your workstation set up properly? You'd also want to look at, are there tripping hazards? Are there cords, extension cords that could trip your employees when they're walking, or are there mats that might be a hazard? It doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're required to have an injury and illness prevention program. Andrew and I don't think we really explained what we do. We're safety professionals basically. And so we work with our policyholders to provide them with we do a risk assessment, and we'll do hazard identification. If you're a state fund policyholder, this is something that's available to you. We have a lot of services that are available to our policyholders, but we do a lot of seminars, and those are open to the public. So at this point, we're gonna turn it back to Kimberly, and she's gonna field the questions that you might have.
We've been, thank you so much, Monica and Andrew. You guys are rock stars in terms of your knowledge on the IIPP process. So thank you very much for your time. I do have a couple of questions. One was sent to me directly through direct message, and then we've got one here on the open Q&A. We'll go with that one first. How do you feel about attaching the required COVID risk assessment and site-specific plan protection plan based on state industry guidance to the IIPP?
So what I recommend, and this is with my experience at State Fund as well as Cal OSHA, I recommend that you have all of your programs, but keep them separate. So with the COVID-19 exposure prevention plan, I would recommend that you have a special binder or a folder for it, but don't necessarily keep it right with your IIPP. Because if I was a Cal OSHA inspector and I come to your job site and you hand over your binder that has all of your information, I might have only wanted to look at your code of safe practices or your safety rules, but then you handed me all of your information, and then I could give you a citation on anything that you gave to me. I hope, does that answer the question?
I think it does. Yes, great job on that. And then I have a couple of questions from one employer who owns a small office, a small business and an office with 8 employees. What type of safety inspections should I be looking for? We have no heavy equipment other than a copy printer.
Okay, so actually Andrew talked about this a little earlier. We have resources on our website. If you go to Safe at Work CA, we have checklists, and you could get a checklist that's for office safety, and it might talk about not overloading the extension or the outlets, the electrical outlets. Check how things are stacked in the office. You want to make sure you have access to all of the, access to egress so that doors aren't blocked and that the fire extinguishers are set up and it's funny. So when I was at Cal OSHA, I never cited people for not checking their monthly fire extinguishers, but there are inspectors that would do that. But if you don't have it charged on an annual basis, that would be a citation. And then, like check the smoke detectors, make sure that the batteries are in good shape, and just things like that. And I would say probably in an office environment, the most important thing is to check out how people's workstations are. Are people comfortable? If you notice that someone's always grabbing their neck, that means that they probably haven't set up their workstation properly. And if you go to State Fund's website, there's information on ergonomics, office ergonomics, that you can use even if you're not a policyholder to help set up your workstation so that you're working safely.
And I also think for Monica and us to just go to construction, because to tell you the truth, that's about 90% of our book of business is construction. But basically, the small offices, it's important to think there are hazards anywhere. So no office or no workplace is free from workplace hazards. That's just not the case. Accidents happen anywhere. You want to make sure you have an evacuation plan in order. So if you have an accident, or let's say that there's some kind of emergency that you need to evacuate your building, do you have a map set up? Do you guys have somebody who's designated to make sure that all the employees are removed from the building? Do you guys keep a roster for people who are there on a daily basis? Things of that nature, just to consider. Also, just making sure that if you're dealing with any kind of toxic chemicals, I know that's a scary word, but to tell you the truth, toner in a copier is considered something that would need to have an SDS sheet, and you would need to make sure that if you get in contact with any of the toner material and you inhale it or anything, do your employees know what to do in that instance? So there's hazards all over any workplace, construction, agriculture, office settings. There's a lot of hazards that could be exposed to for their employees. So you just want to make sure you use our resources on our website, and we can definitely help you out there.
That's great. I have to just acknowledge the surge protectors in our office. When you said don't overload an outlet, I'm thinking of one in particular where we actually have 2 surge protectors plugged into the 2 outlets in the little, the outlet itself. So note to self that we need to, once we get back into the office, I need to make that correction. So thank you.
Yes.
Maybe you need to develop your IIPP.
Yeah, that's it. Speaking of which, we have a couple more questions I do want to ask. There's one, we're a small 3 part-time employee nonprofit organization. We have our IIPP discussion in the employee handbook. Do we need to have a separate plan, or perhaps just a collateral binder with the training and hazard corrections?
Andrew, do you want this one?
Yeah, sure. So if you already have it in your employee handbook that you give, as long as the elements are addressed there, I would just suggest, yes, you can have a separate handbook with all of those training records and everything. But it's also good to just make sure that if it's only about 4 pages or so with all the 8 elements listed, you can take that information out from the handbook and just keep a copy of it. So that way all your information from your employee handbook is in the same folder as your training records, your hazard inspections. It's all in one place.
Excellent, thank you. Another question, do we need a fire extinguisher inside of our office? The building manager has them in the hallways.
So what you need is, if you don't have any hazardous equipment that requires a fire extinguisher nearby, there needs to be a fire extinguisher every 75 feet in an office environment. So if it's not more than 75 feet, that probably would be sufficient. But the main thing is making sure that that fire extinguisher is recently charged. It needs to be charged every 12 months. So if it's over 12 months, or if you look at the fire extinguisher and it's in bad condition, then it needs to be replaced.
And that can go hand in hand with your hazard identification. If you're going through your office and you're inspecting and you see a piece of equipment that could potentially, you know, if it's in an area with a lot of paper equipment, and you know, if that were to spark and catch all the paper documents on fire, that's going to be a hazard that you'd want to make sure that you can alleviate with having a fire extinguisher handy inside the office rather than in the hallway. So
Very good point. Thank you. Yes. One question through direct message. How often, this is from a larger employee, how often should employees be given standard training on the IIPP? Meaning you gave, Monica, you gave some examples of when training should occur, but the repeated training and the reminder level of training, is that an annual? Is that every 6 months, quarterly? What's your opinion on that? Or is there a standard amount?
So technically, for just your injury on the program itself, you only have to do that one time, you know, it's initially, or whenever there are changes to the program. But what I recommend is those are the minimum standards that Cal OSHA sets up. I recommend doing an annual safety training on the IIPP, just so employees remember that, yes, we do have a safety program in place, and these are my responsibilities. These are my supervisor's responsibilities, and this is what my company is supposed to do. But then in addition to that, then there's also training, like depending on, you know, if you're in an office environment, that training might be on ergonomics. It might be on identifying hazards in the workplace, which might be blocked doorways or like we mentioned, the overloaded electrical outlets or anything like that.
Oh, well, great. I appreciate the clarification on that. We have one more question. I think we have about 6 or 7 more minutes. So if anybody watching would like to ask a question, now's the time. We'll be wrapping up here shortly. So I'll go ahead and ask the next question. We are a hotel and currently have an IIPP in place. We're interested in just adding the COVID protocols. Is there a checklist for this?
Actually, Andrew covered this. We have a COVID-19 exposure protection plan. So what you could do is go to our website, even if you're not a state fund policyholder, and you can develop your own COVID-19 program. And then there's a checklist in that as well.
right, so you can go ahead and you can just add that in addition to your IIPP. It's going to be basically you're identifying COVID-19 as a hazard. So it would just go hand in hand with the hazard inspection. You are working with that. Like I said, I will send the link over again. We do have our own COVID-19 exposure protection plan. It's built similarly, just like an IIPP, except obviously everything here is on the basis of COVID-19. So there's hand washing procedures, sanitation procedures, things in that nature, just to make sure that you are mitigating and lessening the exposure to COVID-19.
Excellent, thank you. Question, we have a nonprofit with less than 15 employees. We have office staff and drivers who provide transportation to clients. Just to clarify, should we create 2 separate IPPs for both?
So what I would recommend, you don't have to develop 2 separate IIPPs, but then you would have 2 separate safety rules for whether or not it's an office or the drivers, because the drivers are going to have different risks than the office personnel. In fact, so what I would recommend is doing driver safety training for all of your drivers, and then, or fleet safety training, making sure that they know how to drive safely, that they're defensive drivers. But that might be training that would be beneficial for all of your staff. So that could be one of your safety trainings. Andrew, did you want to add anything or?
No, I think that that's right. As long as if you have 2 different facilities or 2 different offsite locations, it would be beneficial to have two IIPPs with different persons of responsibility. They might look different for each location. But if they're on the road or they're like field employees by driving, I always suggest, or I always recommend to my employers that they could keep a copy of their information. It doesn't have to be the training records or the inspection records, but just a written copy of maybe their program and then some safety material. They can keep it in a binder and they can keep it in their trunk, because a lot of the times that is, as long as it's accessible to them, they can have access to it and they can review it when they need to.
And actually a really good point that Andrew talked about is having that information. Also have like an accident investigation form in the glove compartment of all of the company vehicles. So if there is an incident, then the driver can fill out that information. And then on that same note, make sure the driver is trained to take photos of what happened.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I think that wraps up our portion of Q&A. I do want to thank our partners, the Small Business Development Center, the City of Salinas, and the County of Monterey. And again, many thanks to Luis Alvarez of Alvarez Technology Group. Thank you to Cindy Merzon, the Director of Cal Coastal Small Business Development Center, who covered the Economic Injury Disaster Loan and the Paycheck Protection Program update. And a very, very, very special thank you to Andrew Venegas, the Loss Control Consultant for State Compensation Insurance Fund, and Monica Meyer, Associate Engineer, State Compensation Insurance Fund, for covering the IIPP today. Just as a final reminder, we're also recording this webinar, and we'll send you a link with the recording so you can review today's program. We'll also send out the contact information for the offices of our speakers today. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.